Deja vu. It's a feeling that many people, including myself, have experienced during their lives. This phrase has a few different definitions, but almost none of them are positive. My personal favorite, and the one that best matches this video's premise, is tedious familiarity. Sometimes you experience something mundane that ends up feeling profound. This can be from a concrete memory you have, or it can just be a gut reaction, but the feeling is almost always impossible to ignore. Deja vu is just about the closest thing we have to compare to the narrative device known as the time loop. It's certainly not identical. Instances of deja vu are usually completely random and unexpected, and occasionally the repeated events aren't even provable. Deja vu simply provides an interesting lens to view time loops through, as people who cannot experience time travel. I've always found time loops fascinating for a few different reasons. For one, there are so many different ways to implement them, and so many factors are at play. Is the time loop a choice that the character has made? Does the time traveler maintain the memories of each and every loop? Do the worlds that the traveler leaves still exist and continue? There's also an inherent risk in repeating events that the viewer has already experienced. People frequently talk about media that has good and bad pacing, and introducing a time loop seems like just about the worst thing you could do to a story's pacing. It's so easy to end up feeling stuck as a viewer, to feel like the story and characters aren't making any progress, and things can start to feel predictable. Despite this, there are several advantages that time loops can provide a story. Today, I'm going to walk you all through examples of time loops I've seen in anime. I'll be breaking down what separates them from each other, what makes them distinct, and if I think the time loop mechanic elevates the experience of watching the show. These are just a few examples I've found of time loops in anime. But before we get into the examples, we unfortunately have to cover the different time loop categories. There are some basic categories that I want to create to better understand what makes these different shows, well, different. There will be more categories introduced as the video continues, but I view these as essential to understanding the time loop concept. The first category I want to go over is the decision-making aspect of the loops, being whether or not the character chooses to loop in the first place. I'm going to be referring to these characters as either soft-locked or hard-locked because I think it's funny and an easy way to remember the difference. A soft lock loop is one where the character who's time traveling can choose to break the loop at any point, but makes the decision to continue looping regardless. This could be for a multitude of different reasons, but it usually comes down to the character wanting something to occur, or the opposite, the character wanting to prevent something from occurring. The other option is the hard lock, which is a time loop where the character has no choice in the matter. There are many different ways these locks are enforced, which I will get to, but the time traveling character is forced to sit through the loops until they can figure out why they're looping. There's several other categories within these time loops that I'll discuss as we go, but I'd like to start talking about anime now. Let's start with one of the most popular examples of time looping in anime, Steins Gate.
This is the choice of Steins Gate.
Even if you haven't watched Steins Gate, you're probably aware that the show deals heavily with time travel. You may notice I said time travel and not time loops, and that's because Steins Gate doesn't exclusively showcase time travel through one lens. Steins Gate's first time travel mechanic is called the D-mail, and it seems at first glance to be inconsequential. The user of the device can send a text message back in time as long as it's smaller than 36 bytes of data. While seemingly minor, these messages cause massive rifts in the different timelines of Steins Gate, which are referred to as world lines. So what do these D-mail messages have to do with the time loop mechanic? Well, these messages end up being the reason that Rintaro Okabe, our main protagonist, feels the need to go through time loops. In case you missed it there, I said that Okabe feels the need to go through time loops, meaning that we're dealing with a soft lock loop here. So how do these loops work? They all revolve around a machine created by Kurisu Makise, the machine known as the Time Leap Machine. Without getting too into the weeds of how this machine works, it basically allows the user to send the current version of their memory backward in time to their past self's brain. The biggest flaw with this machine? It can only send your memories back a maximum of 48 hours. That means if something you really don't want to happen were to keep happening, you might feel the need to continue going back in time over and over and over. Ooh. So that's where the time loop comes in. When Okabe watches his childhood friend Mayuri Shina die in front of him, he feels a compulsive need to try a new timeline. Is there something he can do differently in order to save her? Unfortunately for Okabe, there's no easy solution to this. For reasons that Okabe cannot discover, one of two events is entirely unavoidable no matter what world line he's on. Either his friend Mayuri dies or his friend Kurisu dies. The name of the show, Steins Gate, refers to the only world line where both of his friends survive. Steins Gate, the anime, not the world line, is excellent for many different reasons, but one of those reasons is the tone shift when the time loops start occurring. Okabe is an incredibly goofy character at the start of the show, an unserious guy who takes jabs at his friends constantly, and he seems to be way over his head. When things take a turn for the worse, not only do we get to see his attitude and demeanor change, we as the audience are the only ones that can truly feel and understand what Okabe is going through. It's a spectacular way to develop and grow his character, despite the repetitions the show goes through. The feeling of progress is felt through Okabe's experiences, growth, and knowledge, as well as the progress he makes in his relationship with Kurisu. So now we know how and why the time loops in Steins Gate are happening, but I still haven't revealed some of those other time loop categories yet, and where Steins Gate fits into them. Well, let's cover a few of those now. For the type of time loop, I already revealed that this show covers the less common but still highly effective soft lock time loop. Another important thing to cover is the methodology, aka how the character is able to time travel. I also already covered this when explaining the time travel of the show. The time loops in Steins Gate are caused by the time leap machine designed by Kurisu Makise. There are two more important categories I haven't gone into detail on yet, and those would be save states and memory. Save states are a little more difficult to understand, so I'll start there. For those of you who have never played video games on an emulator before, a save state is when you capture the exact state of the game at a moment in time. In simpler terms, it allows you to save your progress and go back to that moment in time in the future, assuming you don't save over it. Once again, this isn't a technical term in the world of narrative devices, it's just a more fun way to remember different types of time loops. I'd say there are two main types of save states in anime time loops, static and dynamic. Static means the point in time that the time traveling character spawns at doesn't change, while dynamic means the save state changes. In dynamic save states, sometimes the time traveling character has to accomplish something for the checkpoint to change, and sometimes it naturally moves with failed attempts. In the case of Steins Gate, we're technically dealing with a dynamic save state. Even though for the majority of the show, Okabe travels back to the same point in time, this is only due to Okabe requiring Kurisu to create the time leap machine. If the time leap machine was around before Mayuri started dying, then Okabe could theoretically leap several times into the past, making the save state dynamic. So while Steins Gate is a somewhat confusing example, I'm going to throw it into the dynamic save state category. And for our final category, I have the memory of not only the traveler, but the non-travelers within the loops. Not all time loopers are created equal. Some can remember all the timelines they've been a part of, some can only remember key details, and some can't remember anything at all. This concept also applies to the other people who are part of the loops, but aren't factors in the time loop methodology I previously mentioned. I'd say there are three types of memory that we see in time loops, those being maintained, hazy, and lost. Maintained means the character remembers all the events of the previous loops, hazy means they remember some events, and lost means they don't remember ever being part of time loops. The reason this becomes complicated in Steins Gate is a concept in the show named reading Steiner. Reading Steiner is an ability that all humans have to some capacity, but Okabe seems to have it to a much greater extent. He's able to remember all the world lines that he's visited in the past. So in this case, Okabe would have a maintained memory, while the other characters would have hazy or lost memory, depending on how competent their reading Steiner ability is. I know that I may have overwhelmed some viewers with how many definitions I've thrown at you all, but I'm done explaining categories now. So before we move on to the next anime, I want to very quickly recount what category Steins Gate falls under. To start, Steins Gate is a soft lock loop. Okabe can choose at any point to stop looping if he wanted to. The methodology for specifically the time loops is the time leap machine designed by Kurisu Makise. Even though Okabe almost always travels back to the same point in time, I'd still consider Steins Gate a dynamic save state show because of the nature of the time leap machine. And finally, the traveler's memory is maintained, while the observing characters have hazy or lost memories depending on their circumstances. Dude, you have no idea how happy I am to finally have all the categories laid out. Thank you, Steins Gate, for having by far probably the most complex and in-depth time travel mechanics of any anime ever. It's so annoying. Whatever. Alright, let's move on to the next show you probably think of when you think of time loops. ReZero.
I've been returning by death!
Isn't it funny that the two most popular time loop anime are both animated by the same studio? I don't know, I just thought that was a funny coincidence. Alright, so ReZero. ReZero is unique for many different reasons, but I think we have to start with the fact that the show falls under the umbrella term of isekai. Isekai, for those who don't know, simply means a show where a character or characters start in one world and travel to a different world, typically through reincarnation, but not always. In ReZero's case, Subaru seems to be living his normal life and is suddenly transported to this new fantasy world. He's in his normal outfit and seems to have brought everything that he had on him at the time, including his cell phone. It's not immediately obvious that Subaru has the ability to travel back in time until he dies for the first time. What, did you think I was gonna waste your time with a plot summary of the first episode? You don't have time for that. You're procrastinating writing a paper or walking your dog or something else that I can't know. So when Subaru dies for the first time, he's transported back to where he started, which is right in the middle of a marketplace. We also see that he goes back to this same spot when he dies for the second time. So what categories can we knock out of the way? Well, we know for sure that the methodology at play is Subaru dying. Later in the series, he decides to call this ability Return by Death, so that's what I'll call it from now on. We also see that Subaru can remember what happened after he dies, meaning his memory is maintained. If you weren't sure what level of memory the other characters have, I'm sure the reaction of Emilia in episode 1 should give you a good clue. Before ReZero fans start coming after me in the comments, remember that I'm only discussing events from season 1 in this video. I'm gonna say the observer characters in the loop fall under the lost memory category. All that's left now is to find the type of time loop and the save state type. It's no mystery whether ReZero is a hard lock or soft lock show. The only way Subaru can travel back in time is if he dies, and every time he dies, he travels back to a point he's already been. We're dealing with a hard lock time loop. Even if Subaru tries his hardest to avoid dying, he will travel back in time when he inevitably dies. What I think makes ReZero a unique and interesting time loop concept is the save state mechanic it goes for. It's true that ReZero isn't a fixed save state show, because that would mean for the rest of the show, Subaru would always respawn and travel back to the marketplace, which would make for an absolutely awful viewer experience. But I don't think it's fair to call ReZero a dynamic save state show either. We see throughout season 1 that Subaru will make a certain amount of progress, and then his save point changes. However, that point doesn't move unless Subaru achieves a certain amount of progress, whether that's an amount of time or a certain event. We don't learn that in season 1. So I think rather than considering ReZero a dynamic or static save state show, I'm going to call it a checkpoint based show. ReZero is a pretty critically acclaimed show, and most of that praise is because of the characterization of Subaru. Subaru starts off as your typical teenage loser character, acting selfishly and approaching everyday events with arrogance. Once you start watching him die pitiful and brutal deaths, and you see how much he cares for the people in his life, you start to wish the best for him. That's when it becomes super easy to root for Subaru, when he starts problem solving. His ability to know what's coming through the experiences he lives, and his ability to lead others to the future he wants, is what makes the show super exciting and thrilling to watch. I know some people can feel frustrated because the anime uses a checkpoint-based system rather than a dynamic one, but I think this approach actually benefits the show's writing. It makes sense that Subaru is problem solving because he doesn't want to die, but sometimes he knows death is inevitable. So, in almost every loop, Subaru learns something new that he can strategize around, and that's what makes him reaching a new checkpoint so satisfying. He definitely deserves some of the things he has to deal with, and I don't think he's the perfectly written character that some claim he is, but I do believe Subaru and ReZero in general are a great depiction of time loops done right. To recap, ReZero is a hardlock loop. The methodology to travel back in time is return by death. The save state type is a combination of static and dynamic that I like to call checkpoint based. The traveler's memory is maintained while the observers are lost. I'm sure this isn't the last time I'll talk about ReZero on this channel, but that's it for this video. So what do I have next? So far, I've shown two anime that are pretty universally loved. Both shows are incredibly popular as well. But like I said at the start of the video, there's an inherent risk in repeating events the viewer has already seen. I think it's time to look at a far more controversial example of time loops in anime. It's time for me to talk about the melancholy of Haruhi's Suzumiya.
Now I know we've done this 10,000 times before.
We're not going to be talking about the whole show today, but rather an arc that occurs in Season 2 that's been named the Endless 8 arc. The Endless 8 arc, without exaggeration, might be the most controversial anime arc of all time. Haruhi as a show is a complete enigma in itself for multiple reasons, but the Endless 8 arc is the one I hear brought up the most often. Some people say it's a one-of-a-kind arc that spectacularly depicts the time loop concept, while others think it completely ruins the entire series. If you know anything about me, you'll probably guess that I fall somewhere in the middle. I'm a well-known fence sitter. Before we get into how well I think the time loop concept is executed in this arc, I think it's important to summarize what happens in this arc of the show. In episode 1 out of 8, it seems like everything is perfectly normal. The members of the SOS Brigade spend the last 2 weeks of their summer vacation together, trying to accomplish all the things Haruhi wants to do. You'd honestly never expect this arc to turn into a time loop from the first episode. It feels totally normal when you consider what the rest of the show was like. It's when the second episode starts that it begins to set in. Wait a second. It's almost like this is the exact same episode I just watched. Did I accidentally click on the same episode again? No, Micah. No, you didn't. Kyoto Animation chose to reanimate the same episode a second time. I will say that this second episode departs from the first a little bit. We see that Kyon is suffering from feelings of deja vu, and he discusses his worries with Yuki, Itsuki, and Mikuru. Yuki reveals to the rest of the brigade that the last 2 weeks of summer have been repeating on a loop thousands of times, all because Haruhi refuses to allow summer vacation to end. Kyon just can't get over this and tries his absolute hardest to stop Haruhi from going home on the last day of summer vacation, but fails to stop her. When the third episode of the arc starts, we see that it begins once again in Kyon's living room. This episode unfolds roughly the same way that episode 2 did, with the brigade doing activities with Haruhi and then discussing how many times they've looped. This is the same formula that continues until episode 8! Kyoto Animation chose to reanimate the same episode 8 times in a row, albeit with slight variations. You occasionally get slightly unique moments, but for the most part, the episodes play out the same way. At the end of episode 8, after watching Kyon fail to stop Haruhi for 6 episodes straight now, we finally get to figure out what was causing the loops to happen in the first place. Kyon asks Haruhi to have the brigade members meet up and finish their summer homework together. This angers Haruhi, but she complies, and when the gang wakes up the next morning, the loop is finally over, after 15,532 repetitions. While the execution of this arc is incredibly commendable from an effort standpoint, it might have been a blunder in the long run. You have to remember that Haruhi was airing weekly on TV at the time, meaning that viewers who would tune in every week were forced to watch essentially the exact same episode over and over again. Some viewers argue that this style of presentation allows for the most immersive time loop experience we've seen in anime, since the viewer literally has to experience the monotony that Yuki Nagato is feeling. Others argue that the arc is a pacing disaster, and the effort that KyoAni put into this arc was basically wasted, since most people recommend you just watch episodes 1, 2, and 8 of the arc. Come on, guys, you should know where I stand on this issue. Come on. While I do think Haruhi executes the time loop concept in a bold and unique way, there are several problems I have with the arc in general. For one, I mentioned at the start of the video that the time loops can easily cause the viewer to feel like there's a lack of progress in the show, and this is a perfect example of that. Basically, the only moment of each episode that feels like there might be a breakthrough is at the very end, and it can start to feel formulaic and frustrating when Kyon fails to stop Haruhi for the 5th time in a row. This time loop also doesn't really help the viewer empathize with any of the characters suffering through the loop. If you compare Yuki Nagato, who's the character who can remember every loop in this instance, to characters like Okabe and Subaru, you're quickly reminded that Yuki doesn't have any emotional attachment to anything. They reveal in the first arc of season 1, in chronological order, that she's an alien, for crying out loud. When Kyon confronts her about why she doesn't stop the loops, she reminds everyone that she's simply there observing Haruhi and doesn't have strong feelings regarding what the brigade does together. I found it super difficult to feel for Yuki in this arc, which just leaves the other characters who don't realize they're looping until 15,000 repetitions in. It seems like many of the weaknesses that can come with time loops are present here. It's not all bad though. That second episode does a great job of revealing how the time loops work, and it gives the viewer a lot to think about. It almost feels relieving to hear them confirm that the person watching isn't crazy and that they are in fact watching the same episode again. I also thought the conclusion of the arc was humorous after the agony that was watching the same episode 8 times in a row. I just think many of the usual strengths that are associated with time loops are missing here, and several of the weaknesses I pointed out earlier are incredibly difficult to ignore. Well, those are my thoughts on a time loop arc that released close to 2 decades ago. Let's categorize this bad boy and move on to the next anime. Haruhi's Endless 8 is a hard lock loop. When the loop restarts, the brigade members all go back to that original point in time 2 weeks before the end of summer vacation. The methodology is Haruhi's power. Her desire for summer vacation to continue forever leads to the resets. The save state is static since the brigade never loops to a new point in time. As for the memory category, Yuki Nagato maintains the memory of every loop. Itsuki, Mikuru, and Kyon have hazy memory after 15,000 loops, and Haruhi, along with every other character that's enduring the loops, has lost memory. Alright, now that we've covered a super controversial example of anime time loops, we can move on to something a lot less controversial. Just kidding. It's time to talk about Erased.
No, you don't get it! I could have saved her!
Depending on who you ask, Erased is either an emotional masterpiece or it's a total train wreck disaster. If you watch the Haruhi section of this video, I don't think I need to read the next sentence of my script. To start, let's talk about Satoru Fujinuma, the main character of the show. He reveals almost immediately that he has a special supernatural power known as Revival that traps him in a moment of time until he's able to fix something wrong. Unfortunately for him, the solutions frequently lead to him experiencing major inconveniences, sometimes as big as life-threatening injuries. This premise is immediately pretty compelling, but it does force you to ask a few questions. Why is Satoru the person with this power? What causes the loops that he gets stuck in? Can he choose to ignore the misfortune happening, or will he be perpetually stuck in that moment of time? Before you get any real answers to these questions, his mom gets murked and Satoru gets framed for murder and runs from the police. Dang, that sucks. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, for Satoru, he ends up experiencing something new within his ability. he travels back in time 18 years, and he presumes this is to stop a murder kidnapping case of several of his classmates. Erased quickly departs from the time loop concept that was initially teased, and it instead becomes a thrilling suspense show with a murder mystery subplot. This is honestly my favorite part of the show. Whether or not you know who the killer is right from the start, you feel the weight of Satoru's decisions, and you hope he can right the wrong that so clearly occurred in his childhood. I'm not going to talk about the ending of the show in this video, simply because I'm focusing on the time loop aspects of Erased, not the full package of the plot and story. I think in terms of an emotional suspense thriller anime, Erased is one of the best in the business. I think in terms of a time loop anime, Erased leaves a lot to be desired. So much of Satoru's ability is left up in the air, and it can almost feel like plot convenience at times. For example, when Satoru is captured by the police in episode 7, he manages to trigger revival and travel back in time 18 years once again via his desire to do so. This isn't an aspect of his ability that is ever explained or looked into again. You kinda just have to take it at face value. You also have to ask why he didn't repeat the loop when he failed to save Kaio the first time. In the first episode, we see him repeat events until he's able to prevent the injustice happening in his vicinity. But once he travels back in time, this aspect of his ability seems to disappear. Despite the time travel in the show not being a strong suit, I still really like Erased. There's some powerful character sentiments present throughout, it's super suspenseful and emotional, and the pacing is just superb. Ooh, would you look at the time? It looks like we need to cover the time loop categories in Erased now, before Revival randomly triggers and makes me re-record this whole portion of the video. Erased is a hard lock loop. Even though we eventually see Satoru control his ability, this is only a one-time event. For every other loop he experiences, Revival forces him to live through it, and he has to discover why it's happening in order to escape. The methodology is the very poorly explained ability known as Revival. Revival, or whatever controls Revival, chooses when Satoru goes back in time and how far he travels back. The save state is dynamic since Satoru never knows when he'll get stuck in a loop, and the loops can vary in how far back they go. Memory is a difficult one to tackle since Satoru remembers every loop, but other characters seem to only remember the loops where Satoru traveled back in time. Because calling his time travel to the distant past a time loop is finicky at best, I'm gonna say Satoru has a maintained memory, while every other character in the show has lost memory. The next show I'm gonna talk about isn't nearly as popular as the 4 I've talked about previously, but I hope some of you watching can get some enjoyment out of it. Next up, we have the hidden gem, Summertime Rendering.
Please, I'm begging you! Just kill me!
Now, the reason I put hidden gem in quotation marks is that the show is actually quite popular. It just happens to be less popular than all the other shows I've already discussed. So what's the premise of Summertime Rendering? Shinpei, the main character of the show, decides to return to his hometown after his adopted sister Ushio drowned to death. Several strange things start happening around the town, to which Mio, his other adopted sister, and a man named Jinchiro explain the concept of shadows. Shadows are essentially clones of people around the island who want to hunt down and kill humans. Shinpei quickly connects the dots and realizes that Ushio's death was not an accidental case of drowning, but rather a murder from one of these shadows. Summertime Rendering is a show about Shinpei trying to stop the shadows and anyone else who might stand in his way from killing everyone on the island. So how does Shinpei try to accomplish this? Similarly to Subaru from ReZero, Shinpei has an ability that allows him to travel through time when he dies. This power comes from his eye, which was given to him by his adopted sister Ushio, the same one who drowned. While Ushio, who is actually a shadow version of Ushio, is the one who gives Shinpei the power, Heine is the actual owner of the eye. All you really need to know about her for the sake of this video is that she also has a powerful eye, and she's aware of the loops Shinpei is going on. Summertime Rendering has a couple of super unique aspects within its time loop mechanics. This anime is a dynamic save state anime, but the way the dynamic save state is incorporated is super interesting. Rather than having a checkpoint-based system like ReZero, Summertime Rendering never has Shinpei travel back to the same moment in time. Later in the series, it's revealed that his power gets weaker with every loop, always giving him slightly less time to work with. At the beginning, his power gives him several days to work with before the Apocalyptic Island event, but near the end, he almost has no time whatsoever. This makes for a unique, dynamic save state case, since Shinpei has to discover how far back he traveled, how much time he has left, and what actions he needs to accomplish. Another unique quality of Summertime Rendering's time loops is that Shinpei is actually looping with Shadow Ushio, making this anime have 2 time loopers instead of the typical 1. This is also the first show where one of the observers has maintained memory, at least after Heine marks Shinpei. With all of those unique elements of this wild show out of the way, let's break down all the categories. Summertime Rendering is a hard lock loop. It's different from typical hard lock loops in that Shinpei does not have an infinite number of loops to work with. He can run out of time to loop back to, and he can die permanently. The methodology of travel is Heine's Eye, which is activated whenever Shinpei dies. The save state is dynamic. Shinpei never travels back to the same location in time. As for memory, it's clear that Shinpei and Shadow Ushio have maintained memory, but Heine clearly has memories of Shinpei's loops as well. Shadow Ushio is also displayed to have the power to transmit her memories to other people, getting them caught up on what's happening. The memory aspect of the show is unique, but super confusing, so for the loopers, I'll say they have maintained memory. As for the observers, Heine has maintained memory, while the others have a new term I call updatable memory. All that means is that these characters have lost memory, but can be updated to remember events from past loops. Now that we've gotten through one of the most convoluted time loop mechanics I've seen, it's time to go to what I think may be the best usage of time loops I've seen in anime. Bunny Girl Senpai.
Yes, she's probably lying to you.
If you were paying attention to the chapter transition just now, you might have noticed that it says this section only contains spoilers up through episode 6. That was not a mistake, that's the truth. One of my favorite things about BGS is that it wastes no time introducing and incorporating supernatural concepts that other shows have covered, but it still has a tremendous amount of depth. The time loop arc that focuses on Koga is no exception to this. So how do the time loop mechanics in Bunny Girl Senpai work? At the start of the arc, we see that Sakura is living high school life like normal. Well, at least as normal as you get in this series. That is until the morning, when he wakes up to realize June 27th is happening for the second time. All of the events that happened the day before have reverted as if they never happened. Whenever Sakura experiences a supernatural problem, he always asks Ryo Futaba. Her explanation this time around was a phenomenon known as Laplace's demon. This phenomenon essentially states that a being could manipulate time, assuming they knew the position and momentum of every atom in the universe. The concept seems preposterous, but Sakura knows for a fact that the same day is repeating. The solution to this dilemma, according to Futaba, is to find the person whose behavior does not repeat every loop. This task seems unfeasible until Sakura realizes that Tomoe Koga, a first year that goes to his school, is behaving strangely. It turns out that Koga is Laplace's demon, and she's looping time to avoid having to respond to a confession of love. The solution that Sakura and Koga agree to is to act like they are in a romantic relationship together so that Koga has an easy excuse to give to her classmate. This agreement would only last until the end of the first term of school to make the two of them breaking up over summer break more believable. While Mai Sakurajima, Sakura's girlfriend, is not initially thrilled by the idea, she trusts Sakura enough to let him go through with it. This breaks the loop, and the two continue on pretending to date as if the loops were never happening. They decide to spend the last day of the fake relationship together at the beach, and then agree to break up. Problem solved, right? The only problem with this is the fact that the loops start happening once again. Rather than looping back to June 27th, the loops start on the 18th of July, the day before summer break begins. It's clear that something must be up with Koga, since she was the cause of the last round of loops. However, when Sakura confronts her, she claims she's not looping with him this time around. When Sakura asks Futaba what the solution could be, she lets him know that the only realistic option is that Koga is lying to him. Just to make sure that there was no better explanation, Sakura went through the loop with Koga several more times. He came to the same conclusion as Futaba. Koga is aware of the loops, but is pretending to be unaware to live out that final day with Sakura over and over again. Sakura, wanting to continue on with life for both his and Koga's sake, decides to call her out on her lies. She continues denying that she's aware of anything happening, until Sakura says, "You can roll the dice as many times as you want, but people's feelings don't change so easily. A lie won't become the truth, and the truth won't become a lie." Sakura caught on to the fact that despite the relationship being a farce from the beginning, Koga still fell in love with Sakura. He lets her know that even if she makes them loop 1,000,000,000 times, he'll still be in love with Mai, not her. Despite her attempts to hide how she felt about Sakura, it turns out she had to confess her true feelings to Sakura to end the loop. When the two of them woke up the next day, they were back to June 27th, the day of the original loop. This allowed both Sakura and Koga to get the closure they deserved from the original June 27th, and the arc ends with the two of them becoming friends. Sorry for the long plot explanation. The time concepts in this arc were surprisingly deep for how short it was. I don't think I really need to get into what these loops did for Koga and Sakura's character development, since you can see the progress by the end of the last loop. So let's get into the categories this show fits into. I don't think it's fair to call this show hard lock or soft lock. It's a hard lock loop for Sakura, since he can't choose to stop the loops at any time. For Koga, it's a soft lock loop, since she's ultimately in control during loop 1. However, it seems like loop 2 was a hard lock for both of them, if we're to believe what Koga said. So I think we have a new type of time loop here. This show is both a hard lock and soft lock loop. The methodology of the loops is Koga's puberty syndrome, which is named Laplace's demon in the show. The save state is static, since the loops always bring the loopers back to the start of the day, and the only points in time we see the loops occur during are June 27th and July 18th. The memory of the two loopers is maintained, while everyone else has lost memory. I couldn't think of a clever transition to this part of the video, but I would feel irresponsible if I didn't provide a disclaimer here. We've talked about 6 shows so far, and while I talked about spoilers for each series in each section, it's ultimately inconsequential to be aware that loops are happening in these series. If you go into these shows knowing that they have time loop concepts in them before watching them, I think you'll still get the full enjoyment of watching those shows. However, some time loop anime are different in that them having time loops at all is a major hidden plot point that could ruin someone's enjoyment if they knew going in. So for the next 2 anime series I'm going to discuss, I've abbreviated their names in the video chapters. That way, if there's a show you were expecting me to talk about in this video, you can see if I cover it, but if you look at the chapter names without knowing the series, it shouldn't outright spoil what shows they are. With all that said, let's get into the next show in the next time loop, Madoka Magica.
I'll stay trapped in this endless maze. Forever.
Calling Madoka Magica a time loop anime would be a bit disingenuous, considering that the majority of the runtime of the show doesn't focus on it. However, understanding the time loop concept in Madoka Magica is essential to getting the full picture of the show. It's not obvious that Madoka Magica has any type of time trickery until episode 10, an anime episode that I plan on fully covering in the very near future on my channel. The reason the show changes so drastically is because the previously dubious and mysterious character Homura Akemi gets her backstory explained. We're taught that Homura has been looping through time in order to prevent Madoka from becoming a magical girl. The reason she does this is because Madoka, and the other magical girls we've seen so far, are doomed to die and turn into witches. Kyubey approaches them with the promise that it can fulfill any wish they may have, with the stipulation that they become magical girls. This fate dooms them to death. either from fighting the witches or from their soul gems becoming corrupt, turning them into witches. Homura has seen Madoka and the other girls reach this fate countless times, and she goes on quite the emotional journey trying to prevent this fate. Homura's ultimate motivation is to save her one true friend, Madoka. We see that as her primary motivation when she makes her wish, asking for the power to go back and save Madoka. Madoka Magica is a soft lock loop. Homura made the wish to go back and save Madoka, and if she chose to die at any point, the loops would end. The methodology isn't fully explained in the show from my memory, but upon doing research, it seems her shield is the tool that helps her achieve time travel. Of course, she received this shield from her wish to save Madoka, so if you want a simpler answer, that works too. The save state, from what we're shown, is static, since Homura always travels back 1 month, back to when she was in the hospital. While we're only shown her traveling back as far as she can, I suspect the true save state of her loops to be dynamic, considering that she can manipulate time in many different ways. Of course, this is pure speculation on my part, so I'll mark down static for now. The memory of Homura is fully maintained, while everyone else has lost memory. One of the coolest parts of this time loop is that we get to see what time loops look like from the perspective of someone with lost memory. Homura is distant for the first 9 episodes of the show, and like everyone else in the show, we suspect that it's either her natural personality or that she's hiding something. It turns out that both of these are true, but not for the reasons we initially believe. This concept helps provide intense depth to a character that up to that point had been super distant, which makes for super effective character writing. Homura goes from one of the most unknown and distant characters to the best written character in the show in 1 episode, and that's all thanks to the time loop narrative device. Wow, that sure is an interesting way to portray time loops. It would be crazy if there was another show that could portray lost memory from the viewer's perspective. I would have made a jump cut to the next section already if I were fine with people getting spoiled. Please don't get spoiled. Without further ado, the final time loop anime I'd like to discuss today, Higurashi When They Cry.
I also understand this is nothing short of a miracle.
Now, if you haven't watched the show and you didn't listen to the spoiler warning, you're probably confused as to why this show is here. If you're one of those people, please just skip to the conclusion. I would hate to be the person who ruins the series for you. For those of you who are in the know, let's talk about Rika Furude. Throughout season 1 of Higurashi, we see several different arcs, which all seem to be different timelines. The way that the events play out seems to be different each time, but Rika explains that she dies in every one of these timelines. It turns out the reason Rika knows that she dies in these different timelines is because she is experiencing each and every one of them. The show frames itself in a strange way in season 1, focusing on different characters as the main character of each arc. It's revealed in season 2 that Rika is the true main character, traveling back in time each time she dies in order to prevent the horrific events that happen to her friends. This main character subversion is super powerful and makes for one of the most unique time loop concepts I've talked about so far. You get the same level of immersion that you get from Haruhi, since you experience some of the loops Rika went through in season 1, you get an answer for why season 1 is formatted the way it is, and you get to feel for Rika and her situation. Seeing what happens to her friends every arc and learning that she's been looping for 100 years makes you feel horrible for Rika, and it helps characterize her despite not getting a dedicated arc in season 1. But what categories does Higurashi fall into? Well, I'm glad you asked. Higurashi is a hardlock loop. Despite Rika basically giving up on the dream timeline after decades of failed attempts, she's stuck looping until the power to do so drains out. The methodology is the power of Hanyu, Rika's companion. Apparently, Hanyu's power is fully explained in the visual novel, but I didn't read that, so just know that Hanyu is looping alongside Rika and gives her the power to go back in time. We're dealing with a dynamic save state, as we see Rika try to figure out how far she travels back in season 2. Rika and Hanyu seem to remember every loop, but other characters show glimpses of memory from other loops. The only reason I put that they seem to remember everything is because of memory haziness we observe in the last loop. Rika doesn't seem to remember that Takano is the culprit right away, which would imply that she can't remember the events of every loop. Regardless, I'm going to put maintained memory for the two loopers and hazy for the observers, even if both seem to be edge cases. Those are just a few examples of time loops in anime. Whether you watched every section or you skipped right to the end, I want to thank you all for giving this video a chance. I'm sure there are plenty of time loop anime I missed, but I think it's fair for me to ask that you guys cut me some slack there. As some of you probably saw from the last two entries, sometimes shows are hidden as time loop shows since it spoils the plot, so you can't always just seek this type of show out. I luckily stumbled into 8 different time loop shows and felt like discussing how well the mechanic was implemented, since I thought some of the loops were excellent and helped me feel for the characters. If this video does well enough, I'm sure I'll make a sequel at some point. There are bound to be plenty more time loop anime for me to check out. Heck, there's a time loop show airing right now. It does happen to be about a girl who can travel back in time by taking off her underwear, but who knows, maybe it's good. Of course, I'd like to ask that discussions about specific plot points of these shows and recommendations for time loop shows that would spoil the premise be presented with spoiler warnings, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video in the comments. This is a new format for me, so constructive criticism is greatly appreciated. Regardless of how well this video does, I'm super compelled to continue making video essays on anime, so I hope you all stay tuned for my future content. Thank you for watching, and I hope one of these days you experience deja vu so strong you click another video of mine when it gets recommended to you. Peace out, team.